We're at the final session of the day. It's a panel. Got a great lineup for you here, and I'm going to moderate this myself. So please allow me to introduce my panel for what makes a social game truly social. This will take us through to about 12:30, and then I'll wrap things up and explain what's happening next. If you've got questions for the panel, I'll just say again, do drop them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and I'll grab those and I'll put them to the panel when we get to a good point. I've got plenty of my own questions though, as the panel no doubt are aware. Brace. I'll try to get as many of these as I can in, and I will leave time for audience questions as well at the end, I promise. So let me welcome to the virtual stage our panelists for this last panel of the Hypercasual Social Games track. So I'm going to welcome in no particular order, Jasmin, Dahncke from Mainframe Industries, Alessandro Lacroce from Whatwapp, Jeferson, Valadares from Doppio Games, and Rym Zerroug from Snap. Thank you very much. Great range of experiences and expertise here. So folks, thank you very much for being with us. If you could all unmute, I'll dive in and give you folks a chance to introduce yourself. Just to set the scene, we're going to be knocking around some ideas about what makes a social game truly social. Got a load of questions to dive into the kind of basic terms of it, what the games are, the market, and so on. Have those in mind when you're asking questions. But let's kind of dive in here and meet our experts who are going to be talking around these issues of social games. I'm going to invite our guests to introduce themselves. Sort of give a bit of background to themselves and their company. I'll tell you what we'll do. Jasmin, I'll start with you, and then we'll go to Alessandro after that and work our way down. So Jasmin, welcome. Thank you for joining us here at Pocket Gamer Connect Digital 7. Please introduce yourself and your company to the audience.
Yes, thanks, Dave. Yeah, my name is Jasmin. I'm a senior UX designer at Mainframe Industry, and I'm currently working on a cloud-native MMO.
Amazing, thank you. And then Alessandro, let's head to you next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alessandro Lacroce, and I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of Whatwapp Entertainment. We try to bring traditional and evergreen games to the mobile world.
That's great, thank you. And then Jeferson, let's talk to you next.
Yeah, so co-founder CEO of Doppio. Like we specialize in games that you can play with your voice, and yeah, more and more we're doing in the social space because obviously voice is the primary way we connect with each other. So.
Amazing. Yeah, good. We'll come back and talk about that later for sure. And then last but not least, of course, Rym from Snap. Do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me. My name is Rym. I work at Snap, where I help game developers build and grow their games on Snapchat. I've been at Snap for 4 years and super excited. I have never been that excited that now that we're partnering with game developers to disrupt the industry together.
That's great. Thank you. What a great introduction. And yes, Rym, we had one of your colleagues from Snap talking earlier on about Snap games. That was fascinating. So we'll dive in here, and I've got questions for all of you. We'll get through as many as we can. We'll sort of see where the conversation takes us. Let's start about to define some terms to start with. On this track this morning, we've talked about a number of different types of game, lots of hyper casual going on here, but this is about social games. What do we mean when we're talking about social games? Let's start with that. And maybe let's do at the same time what we don't mean when we're talking about social games. Let's define some terms. Are there any specific mechanics that define a social game? I'd like to get a take from everyone, but Rym, let's start with you since we've just spoken. What mechanics define a social game for you?
Yeah, so for me, let's go back to what is Snapchat. Snapchat core proposition is chatting with your real friends. And the games, the Snap game proposition, either on platform with Snap Games or with our SnapKit SDK off platform, we are carrying on actually this core value proposition to benefit game developers. So our embedded platform Snap Games on Snapchat is deeply connected to our social graph. So it's easy to invite friends, for example. It's easy to jump into a session, to play with them, share, use the voice and the chat, and play together. So the game is important, but also the social part and the connecting part is too. So how do you build a game basically that people want to play, but also connect people together to the chat, etc., and build social relationships?
That's great. You've hit on some I think some core concepts there that we'll come back to time and again about connectivity. Let's just go back there to Jeferson. You mentioned the fact that you work a lot on voice, but you're also looking more and more at social. So what does social mean to you? What does it not mean?
Yeah. I think, like I was also in the early Facebook days. I was at Playfish at the time before EA bought the company, and so at that time he meant like Facebook games, right? Like when people talk social, like he really meant like Facebook games at the time. But I think, just looking at games in general, games is play, right? Like very human thing. Like it's a very social thing. Like play is always like with someone else, right? So there's that. It's like it's always been social. I think the electronic games, which is like, I guess we're talking a little bit here, like start socials out, right? Like the experience of going to the arcade and hanging out with people and seeing the high scores and all the stuff. So it was always very social. As it kind of advanced into like consoles and became like more home entertainment, and the internet wasn't there, then it became a little bit like a single player experience, like we were just playing by ourselves. But as the internet came back, then we're surprised it's a social activity again, right? And I think like I said, 10 years ago, it meant like people would hang out on a social network, and it meant like, a game played on a social network was like a social game, right? But I think the biggest change that we're seeing, or one of the biggest, I guess, trends in games today is like games are really the place to hang out now, right? Whereas in the past, people used to hang out on Facebook and some of these places. Now they're actually hanging out inside games, whether that's like Fortnite or Roblox or, whatever. Like more and more people are like going into this virtual world and hanging out there, whether that's like, a 3D thing or, a chat thing or a different thing. So I think it's everything. Everything, every game that has another human, and that's kind of meaningful part of the experience, I would qualify as a social game.
That's fascinating. I'm myself, with the work that we've been doing with like Brian, who you saw earlier, and so on, I'm fascinated with the beyond games concept of the metaverse and the way that people hang out using games and so on. Maybe we could talk about that in a little bit, but you raised, some fascinating points there. Love the idea that games were always inherently social, and that the single player experience is almost kind of a secondary. Love that. Alessandro, I'll come to you next, and Jasmin, I'll come to you at the end because I've got another question for you. But so, Alessandro, what's your take on this? Can we define any specific mechanics that mean social gaming to you?
I agree with what Jeferson said, and I believe that at the basic level, you need to look at interaction between players, and they could be like maybe at the beginning during arcade, it was a real life interaction, but now we are looking more at digital interaction, and that translates to from very simple feature like leaderboards, comparing scores, or multiplayer, player versus player, but also to more complex structures like guilds, teams, co-op modes, and all of this stuff. So I believe that by the time the complexity of social games is increasing and is replicating the real life, experience.
Right. Interesting. We could. I guess kind of layer on what social means with all sorts of different kind of facets and things. That's great. And so Jasmin, I'll come to you and get your take on that question. And then I've got a specific question for you. So what are there any mechanics for you that define what a social game is? And also, is there anything that you've heard that you think, well, actually, maybe that's not a social game? So what is and isn't a social game for you?
Yeah, as the others said, there are plenty of mechanics that are all about connecting yourself with other players. So it's really hard to pinpoint one. There is a chat, there is a guild, there is a certain way to acquire points together through certain features. I think the interesting thing is also it's so hard to tell. It's basically just that there's somehow other players and they can be perceived by you. It's not about, it can be asynchronous, it can be synchronous, it can be real time, it can be turn-based. Like in all these places, there can be social happening. So yeah, it's hard to pin down. There are so many great features that basically elicit community.
Community, that's a great word. I think we'll come back to that. So before we sort of go into talking maybe about some of the types of game and things, I'm going to ask you a question as kind of a segue there, because you mentioned in your introduction to yourself your experiences in UX, right, and about user and kind of user interfaces and user experiences and building a user-centric design culture for games. So how does that relate to social? Do you have any sort of specific thoughts for our audience about what makes what makes a great user experience for social games?
Yeah, like my job is to create or help together with the game designers to create the flow and the onboarding and the understanding of how to connect and discover other players, for example. How easy is it to join a guild or to find even a community that I am interested in, for example. And that doesn't even, it's not even only about, you know, in games, you know, something like Twitch has come around, or Roblox, that just connects so many people. So my job is specifically to analyze with the product owners and game designers, okay, what are we trying to create here? Do we want to pit people against each other? Is this a PvP feature? Or, you know, do we want to put them together to build something? So it's very specifically to design the onboarding flows for the feature, and, you know, to really create the intended experience that
Right.
is wanted.
No, that's good. That's good. Let's kind of move on, unless anyone wants to kind of to chip in on that. I'd like to kind of rattle on with some of the questions about the games, kind of launching from what we've just heard there and from what Jasmin said, talking about kind of social games. Let's very quickly just talk about what makes a great social game then. What are the metrics that define success? Is it more about engagement or about time played? We've had lots of talks this afternoon looking at ways to kind of look at lifetime value and so on. How do you know when you've got a good social game on your hands? I'll tell you what, Rym, let's come to you and talk about your experience from Snap. What are the metrics that define a great social game?
Yeah, so we know that people that play together actually and play with, you know, the voice and the chat spend more time playing. Okay. Than if they were playing solo. The larger the group of friends they are joined with, and the longer the sessions. So a longer session and longer time spent are close proxy to monetization as well, because, like, of course, longer time spent increases the opportunity for in ads. So the metrics we will look at are how many people are playing the game with friends, the time spent, of course, but also how many people are sharing, you know, the games, are inviting friends, are challenging them, and how many new players a single player can bring to your game.
Okay, that's good. I'm gonna come to Jeferson next and see if you want to chip in on that. What are the kind of metrics that define a great social game for you? Are they the same as what define a great game generally?
No, I think yeah, the angle is a little bit different, because you're trying to measure, like, a great social game is a game that generates interesting dynamics, like social dynamics in the group, which, you know, means like people have more fun, and so it kind of translates. So some of it, like if you just look at the end metric, like retention, right? Like it looks the same, but you kind of have to measure that a little bit different, like in between those metrics. So we do look at, like, you know, groups that people they play with, and then do they have recurrent groups that they play with, and yeah, the number of times somebody who's got invited to the game, like, adds more, like creates a new group, a new kind of like social, like, graph, like from that, right? So we for us, it's a lot about, like, the social graph, like, you know, when people come in and they create a group of players, and then those players invite other players, and then, so, you know, there's a bit of virality, a bit of retention, a bit of, like, how overlapping those groups are. We tend to look a lot on that specifically. Of course, retention is always a measurement, but the monetization in the end, like, we all need to survive. But I think it's important to, like, not just focus on the end metrics, but also try to understand a little bit what's going on.
Right, that's great. And in fact, our last speaker, Riley, was talking a lot about how you kind of quantify fun to a degree as well, because that's you know, those are the metrics there. Jasmin, do you want to come in on that before I move on? Have you got anything to add to what Rym and Jeferson have said?
No, I think they summed it up perfectly. The data is specifically about the participation of these players with each other. And as Rym said, you know, one of the major learnings in the last decade is that this increases engagement, having other players. And to be honest, the whole free-to-play genre couldn't exist without. This is what it's based on. No matter if it's about cosmetics or power creep, it's all about showing off or helping, you know, others. It's not just for me.
Right. That's great. I'm going to come to Alessandro next, but those are all really kind of great points. And just reminded me that I want to say that to the people watching as well, if you've got questions that touch on any of these topics, do drop them into the Q&A box, and I'll grab those at the end for everyone. Alessandro, I'm going to come to you because I want to talk a little bit more about the games themselves at this point. And I'm thinking of you because Whatwapp, perhaps you can talk a little bit about the type of games that you create. I know that you take a lot of sort of traditional games like card games and make social games of them for mobile. So this is a good opportunity to speak to you a little bit more about that, but also to everyone about how Well, what kind of genres work great for social games, basically, is what I want to kind of dive into now a little bit. What we're seeing on platforms. But let's start with you, Alessandro. Tell us what you think are the kind of the best genres for social games, and whether it's the kind of subgenre question or whatever.
Yeah, of course, we since we make traditional card games, we are very lucky that our games are social by design. They have been playing in families, with friends. So it's really important for us when we start to make a game, and that's one of the main challenges, to understand how do they play the game, where do they play? They play in bars, they play in schools and stuff like that. So to give you an example, we have Scopa, which is one of our biggest game, and they used to play it in bars among adults. And there is this tension that builds up during the gameplay. And at some point of the game, you can take all the cards on the table with just one single moves. And knowing that, in real life, player jumped on their chairs and screamed Scopa, just, as an act of showing, that really is key for us to understand how we can deliver that kind of experience, that kind of social interaction in our game. So I would say that is one of the main challenges and of course, opportunities. The second part probably is, sorry.
Oh no, sorry. On that point, Alessandro, how do you overcome that challenge? How do you create that moment, that social moment of triumph in a game?
I guess that's has a lot to do of the timings of the gameplay and also the user experience. Like you can customize your own wording of the animation, and the customization is very important, and it adds a personal touch to it, and everybody sees your own animation. So that's key, probably.
Great. Sorry, yes. And so the second part of that question, about the
I was just saying that being lucky that our games are social by default, we see like as an opportunity a very strong long-term retention, because it builds up social pressure, and like all these links, they organize by themselves. They want to participate into group events and stuff like that. So if you are able to crack that part, then there are a lot of opportunities, I guess.
Right, that's that sort of emergent experience as well. That's fantastic. Thank you. So Rym, I'll come to you next as well. Let's stick with that question about what makes a great social game, the sort of genre of social games itself. What games are successful on Snap? Are you seeing particular kind of genre games? And are there any kind of, I guess, kind of crossovers where gamers maybe wouldn't call them social games per se? Maybe they come from another category, but you identify them as being great social games.
Yeah, so Snap Games is still a young platform. We launched it just over 2 years ago, and our vision was to build a platform where Snapchatters could play with their friends easily. So this is why we built the platform with that in mind, with embedding, the chat and the voice feature to all HTML game that launch. Since then, we had like over 200 million Snapchatters that have played games in Mini over the past 2 years, and games like Aquapark from Voodoo and Color Galaxy from Gizmart, and many others are having more than 40 million unique Snapchatter, playing with those, which is really amazing. And Snapchatter loves spending time, playing. We have our first party, a game that is called Bitmoji Party, where the average DAU is spending 20 minutes playing per day.
Wow.
So we do have over 30 actually games on the platform at the moment. We're working with fewer developers, very curated. We want to focus on them as they share our values and DNA, and give them all the attention they need at the moment to bring their vision and their games to hundreds of millions of Snapchatters.
That's great, thank you. That's really interesting, and you touched on a couple of interesting things there, because you also you mentioned kind of Aquapark from Voodoo there, and Voodoo are a sort of hyper casual developer, and we've talked a little bit about that this afternoon. But then you're also talking about your own Bitmoji game having like a 20-minute usage, which is not so much hyper casual. That's more involved, right? I wonder how much you feel that Of the games that are on the Snap Games platform, how many would you say are kind of hyper casual compared to sort of other types of game?
So we consider that all the games, any game actually can be made social, and can work well on our platform. The only main thing is to make it instant, and this is why we're building HTML5. It's very instant, no download, less friction to connect with friends and chat with them, have the voice, etc., and all those sharing mechanics that you can have. So we don't think of any specific type of game that can be really social. We think that all of them can become even more hyper social, either on Snap Games with our features, or also off the platform, thanks to the SnapKit SDK and our Bitmoji that can make the experience more personalized, and you can have other social sharing features that can be added to the games that are not only published on Snapchat but also on iOS and Android.
No, that's perfect. You mentioned there about hypersocial as well, which is a term that your colleague Fintan used earlier on in the morning. That's great. Thank you for that. And I think I'm going to stick with definitions for a little bit. I'm going to come to you next, Jasmin, because I've got a specific question for you, Jeferson, in a minute. But Jasmin, do you want to pick up on some of these things? Do you think that social games are their own genre, or are they a form of playing any other kind of game? Are there crossovers? What do you think, Jasmin?
Yeah, I've thought about this for a while and I didn't really come to a conclusion. However, every genre has social components nowadays. A leaderboard can be part of anything. So it's, as I said in the start, it doesn't matter if it's a real time or turn-based, or is it synchronous or asynchronous? It can be part of any kind. Every genre can be made social in that sense. So I wouldn't define them necessary, even though of course nowadays we have these trends and these huge games like Fortnite, and I mean, is it a social game? This is the thing, in a way it's emergent gameplay. The game wasn't designed in that way, however, people created, they used this as a chat room, so it's really interesting. Maybe sometimes it's not even intended to, and then, but it becomes that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, for sure. And also there's other factors there as well. I think, Rym mentioned the function of kind of hypersocial games there to be instant, which kind of Fortnite isn't quite as much. And there's loads of different ways to cut it, right? But one of the things that was mentioned, I think, by Rym there as well, which was about kind of voice and camera and all that kind of thing. Jeff, so I'm going to come to you because you're doing a lot of work at the moment on voice games. I know you've got experience across the whole gamut of games, but you mentioned that voice, the part that plays in social as well. Is voice the perfect way to engage a casual audience? How do voice games work in social?
Yeah, I think part of our the reason why we started the company is because we have a strong belief that voice as an interaction it has the potential to be the new touch, right? The same way touch changed the world and brought a lot more people to gaming 10 years ago, because instead of having to kind of click or use a joystick or whatever, people could just touch on what they wanted to. It's a much simpler interaction. I think voice has the same potential, instead of talking from a UX perspective, if you're trying to learn how to use software, then if you want to print something, you got what do I print? File, print. It's super. You have to learn how to use software, right? But if in voice control, you can just say print, and then it's up to kind of the developer to figure out what to do with that, right? And then how to deliver it correctly. So from a user perspective, it's transformative. You don't need to type, you don't need to. It's much faster. You can just say what you want, and then the thing works, right? So I think obviously there's challenges in tech and all those things, but those things get better all the time, and I think that's kind of the potential we have. And yeah, I think because again, social is about people interaction. The most natural form of interaction between people is talking, right? So I think we do learn how to type and text and stuff, but we still talk. At least some of us still talk to each other, and I think that's so voice has that channel, and a little bit like Alessandro mentioned, some of the stuff is naturally social. And then there's the kind of the magicians, the craft of making that fun, being able to react at the right time when something happens. And I think that's a lot of what we do too, is we respect the fact that people are there and they're hanging out and they're talking to each other, but we deliver we're kind of paying attention and then making the experience more fun based on what's being said at the time and those things happening. So it's for us and that's kind of why I kind of started the company, right? And why we believe in it. But I think the reason we believe is because it's very natural, it's a human thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting, isn't it? I was listening to someone talk the other day about how just like the current generation, kind of Gen Z, can't ever believe that people didn't have cameras in their pockets. We're going to have a generation of people now who won't believe that you can't just talk to a device and get it to answer you. You know, we're sort of, you know, that's becoming much more common now as an interface.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's it. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the market, but before I go there, I'm just going to get a little bit of sense from you all, I think, about what your favorite social games are, however you define it, based on what we've just said. I'd like to just kind of very quickly, just to kind of use this as a jumping off point, just sort of find out what your favorite social games are. It's fine if it's one that you've been working on yourself, by the way, or you can define it perhaps, Rym, maybe what's the most successful currently on Snap Games. I know you've mentioned a couple of games there as well already. So let's just kind of quickly, we'll start with Jeferson there. What are you playing right now? What's your favorite social game?
Yeah, well, I usually don't do this. I have to say, like, I very rarely talk about a game that I made, but like the game we're working on right now, which comes out like in hopefully in a week or two, like it's a game where like, people are hanging out and, you know, again, the game is reacting to what people are saying. Like we as a development team have been working on this for like months, and we play every day. We have the build review where we kind of see what's going on and we go look at it at the end of the day, and we're still having fun. Like it's been like months of playing the same game every day. And I think that's, I mean, obviously I'd love to say that because we're amazing game developers, but really I think it's like, we're just staying out of the way of the normal natural fun that happens when people are playing, you know, like I think that we found a way to kind of we found a very natural way to like let the experience be, people can just talk and have fun, and then like with their friends, and the game enhances that. So it's we know that, you know, it's not our job to stay in front of the experience. Like we let people hang out, and then we kind of make that more fun, you know. So I think that's hopefully, you know, I mean, you guys will be able to see the game in a few days, but it's been a long time since we had a game in development that the whole team still enjoys after months of playing
Right.
like every day. So like we're pretty excited about it.
That's
Can't wait for other people to try it.
No, I look forward to it. That's exactly the response you want from your own team to still love it after putting all the effort in. Let's very quickly go down the panel and say, like I said, it's fine to say something you're working on, or perhaps there's a game that you just enjoy playing. Jasmin, you got what social game do you love right now?
Yeah. Let me tell a little bit about, there are a couple of moments in my life where I was truly moved and, you know, just excited by gaming. It was when we got the first PlayStation and we played Valadares and seeing 3D graphics. It was amazing. The second one was in the start of the 2000s, the first Xbox, playing MotoGP online. I could talk to the person in front and behind me. And then the last one, and that is the game that I think has defined and really showed the way that, you know, how much opportunity there is, and that's Pokemon Go. Like there is nothing that has changed and showed us, you know, how much, you know, we can connect people and how you know, good we actually are. Like when my friends took me to the first raid, I was just like, I couldn't imagine that something like this is possible.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. Actually, and it's interesting how I think Niantic responded to the pandemic by changing Pokemon Go last year, so it was still playable despite everything. And so no, that's great. Those are great answers. Rym, let's come to you. Do you have a great example of a social game you want to share with us? You mentioned a couple that are already doing great on Snap Games. What's the most popular game there, and what's your favorite?
Well, I'm gonna talk about my favorite. I have to say it's Aquapark from Voodoo. I really like the design. I really like the color. It's very colorful. It's easy to play. It's very easy. With your Bitmoji, you're seeing the other competitive. Like it's very competitive. So it's really fun that you're seeing the little face of the people. And I have to say, it just reminds me also maybe of my Aquaparks time when I was a child and having a lot of fun. So yeah, it's really funny. But Aquapark is a good example. You know, the game already existed and was already a success from Voodoo back in the days. They had 100 million download, and it was a solo game. And then Voodoo launched it, updated second edition of the game on Snapchat, on Snap Games, where they focus really by adding adding the multiplayer version, adding the more personalized experience with the Bitmoji, and making it more competitive. So yeah, it's super exciting that they're finding success and they're launching 5 more games with us. But yeah, this one is my favorite.
That's great, thank you. And Alessandro, I'm going to come to you as well before I move on to you with my next question. What about you? What's what social game do you want to tell our audience about? And it's fine if it's one of yours.
It's okay. It's hard to pick a favorite game. What I find myself coming back from time to time are like old games, like at least old in the mobile era, like Clash Royale or Hustle Castle. Those are games that I usually come back every once in a while to have some fun and relax. But I just started Match Masters from Candivore. And it's like a PvP match 3 game, but I'm yet there to reach the level to unlock the social feature. So I don't know if it will be like a great social experience or not.
Okay. What I'm going to do now is talk a little bit about the market for games. We've sort of defined some terms, and we've talked about some games that we know are working and what we think of as social games and the challenges and opportunities. But let's talk a little bit about the market generally. Something that that I mentioned a minute ago when Jasmin was talking about Pokemon Go was the pandemic. And we've mentioned various kind of games throughout this chat, including, for instance, Fortnite, that have all benefited from us being locked up at home and how we've connected online. And games have provided a real platform for that. But what does the market generally look like now for social games, now that we're emerging from the pandemic? Are there any trends that we can see? Are we going to see more or less interaction? Let me just stick with you, Alessandro, while we were just talking there. What's your perception of the market at the moment? Is it going to change now that we're coming out of lockdown and can all start moving around again?
So for us, the pandemic really skyrocketed our growth, because people that used to play those games in clubs, in private homes and stuff like that, they turned to mobile to get their form of entertainment. So the challenge here for us is that now that we are luckily getting back to a almost normal situation, it's to retain those players and show them how to use our social feature properly. The thing for our game is that they look for the core gameplay, not for the social part. So it's up to us to show them that there is a social ecosystem in those games, and that's one of the biggest challenges so far.
Okay, now that's interesting. Let's go to Jeferson. What are your observations about the market and the market for social games and the way it's evolving? Are there any trends we should be aware of? I'm thinking particularly the pandemic, but anything else that you're keeping your eye on?
Yeah, obviously, I think the pandemic, like everyone that I know, or most people anyway, had like a bump last March of like usage and monetization stuff, because as people like turned back. And I think so it's also like just from an investment point of view, like we're kind of VC funded startup, so we talked to VCs, and we had like a lot of reach outs from VCs over the last year. And I think we always had gaming VCs, but I think like I would say like quote unquote traditional tech VCs also figured out that games maybe is not such a bad idea. I think they're usually afraid because games is this crazy thing, but now it becomes more like a thing that everyone does more and more so, right? And new generations are completely like can't, like I said, can't understand the concept of not having like a digital game or something. Yeah, I think it's just like a more like attractive space. So yeah, I mean, it looks positive. I think the pandemic. Obviously, I think there'll be like a bit of a retraction, like whenever people can, like, of course, people are going to go and be in the park for like 2 weeks, like nonstop once they can, and go to the beach or whatever. But our lives change, right? Like a lot of my friends in the Bay Area, like a lot of them moved outside of like San Francisco. I mean, they used to be like in SF or like somewhere in the peninsula, and now they're like in Oregon or Colorado, or like a lot of people moved and kept their jobs. So I think a lot of the social networks that people had, like, are going to be more fragmented geographically. So like you're still going to have your own friends, and also a lot of people realized over the last year, I think video calls and those things, people figured out. It used to be a thing that you did with one, like, or maybe you call your parents or something, right? But then a lot of people figured out actually it's not that bad to do this with my college buddies, or like, so a lot of people saw a lot of their friends more during the pandemic than in the previous like 3 years or something, right? Because because nobody had an excuse to go get out of a video call like over the last like 12 months. But so I think our lives changed, and I think like they're more fragmented, they're more distributed, people are more used to doing this. So yeah, I just see more opportunity, I think, in general. I think it was a positive. I mean, obviously, like it was a sucky time for the world, but I think as far as like social digital games, I think it was a positive development.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting, isn't it? The pandemic, in many respects, kind of accelerated things rather that were already happening. And you're right. Things like the people's separation and the ability to play games online. I mean, Fortnite was already a success before the pandemic, but during the pandemic, I found things like people playing Dungeons and Dragons. Groups of my old college friends were able to do those kind of social games online, and that facility was always there. But we were suddenly sort of forced to try it out and discovered that it was a great way to keep people together across.
I actually went back to like a couple of my old D&D groups for the same reason, because like I moved out. I mean, I moved a lot, right? So I'm originally from Brazil, but I lived in Finland, I lived in the UK, I lived in the US, now I'm in Portugal. So I have friends everywhere. And some of my D&D groups I can't play anymore because I'm not there. But during the pandemic, we actually played because everyone was at home anyway. It was just a matter of time zones. And so I actually went back to playing like with some of the groups, which was fun.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's it. Thank you. And Jasmin, sort of similar question to you, the same kind of topic. Let's talk about the market a little bit. Do you have any sort of perceptions about the social gaming market? Is it, is the trend towards more popularity, like we were saying, or do you see any other observations?
My main observation is, and maybe I'm a little bit biased because I work with a tech that will be enabling cross-platform play, and I think that is the future. It's accessibility, and I'm not sure if the pandemic helped it or not. I think it was anyway the plan for many publishers and services, to connect people, and the best way to do it is to run the game on all possible platforms.
Right.
And we have seen it with Fortnite, and last year the beautiful Genshin Impact came out. It's not necessarily super social, still it has these elements where you can play with friends, and you can play on any platform, right off the bat. I mean, it was a very expensive project, but it shows the success of connecting and being able to play wherever. So in the future, also doesn't matter what at least the hardware won't be the problem anymore.
Right.
I think that's the main trend that I see.
That's interesting. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and so like Rym mentioned a little bit the instant thing, and then like Jasmin's talking about like the cross-platform. I think that's another thing for sure. Like kids these days, like they don't really understand like, oh, do I need to buy this thing to play this thing? No, like I just play it, whatever, right? I play it on my iPad, I play on my PC, like whatever, right? The thing just needs to be available. And like this concept of like a platform, like it's an artifact that is like slowly disappearing. It's going to be an entertainment thing.
Yeah, the latest news from Microsoft is their plan is to just plug a gamepad into your smart TV. There will be no more hardware required in the future.
It's a game. Like I want to play this game. Doesn't matter where you are, you should be able to play it. I think that's an expectation that like people are starting to have more and more.
The infrastructure of internet is the where you get it from. Basically, it's the only necessary thing.
That's it, exactly. As internet speeds and processing of your phone. I mean, your phone is as good now as computers were. It's a powerful computer. And I agree. Things like with the Xbox Ultimate Game Pass and PlayStation has the same facility. The fact that I can play my games on my mobile phone as well. These things just suddenly become very, very different ways of approaching it. But yeah, that's interesting. I'm gonna sort of reaching the end now. In fact, we might not have too much time for audience questions. That's okay because we've managed to get through most of mine. So I really appreciate the panel romping through all the questions I've had. Rym, I'm going to come back to you because working with a platform like Snap. I mean, what are your kind of perceptions of the market? You've been in the games business for a couple of years, like you said. So you've kind of seen a really interesting sort of snapshot. Are there any kind of market changes that you're aware of that you should share with us? I mean, what's the has the pandemic really helped Snap Games? What's your take on the direction it's going?
Yeah, so definitely we know that COVID-19 has magnified the mobile gaming trends on Snapchat. When we look at the numbers, and it has continued actually in Q1 2021, consumer globally spent 1.7 billion per week on mobile games, which is 40% up than pre-pandemic's level. So that's huge. And in fact, the forecast suggests that over 120 billion will be spent on mobile games in 2021 alone. So the trend is still going on in terms of market and market size. And in terms of market change, and I think I will join Jasmin and Jeferson, our games are in HTML5. So they're instant, no downloads, less friction. And I think it's about, yes, the fact that it's less friction and more connecting people. And we're not the only company, as you said, working on this. From my understanding, all big social media platforms are investing in this. Facebook with instance games and WeChat have been doing it greatly, TikTok, etc. So the future, so it is the future in a way. It's not a competition to stores, right? But it's another great platform to publish your game on and deliver a great hyper social experience for players.
That's great. Thank you. Wonderful. Look, wonderful questions for wonderful answers for all of you. And I appreciate you dealing with all my barrage of questions. We've kind of reached the end of this morning's track. I don't think there are any specific questions from the audience, but what I'm going to say is that if people want to ask questions of you folks, they should find you on Meet to Match, Discord. You're welcome to drop your contacts, your LinkedIn into this window here or whatever. But I want to just really give you a big round of applause and thank you very much. You're going to have to imagine this coming from the audience. Hopefully next year we'll be able to do this in person. But I know that everyone would have really liked that. Thank you very much. Jasmin, Dahncke from Mainframe Industries, Alessandro Lacroce from Whatwapp, Jeferson Valadares from Doppio Games, and Rym Zerroug from Snap. That was great. I really appreciate you taking the time this morning to run through just what is a topic that we probably could have spent all afternoon talking about. And I appreciate you giving us a snapshot insight there into that. Thank you very much.